It is the winter of 1943, and somewhere beneath the streets of occupied Europe, a German engineer is staring at a dead rat. This is not an unusual sight. The engine rooms and boiler houses of German-held factories were filthy places, cramped, poorly maintained, crawling with vermin. Rats were as much a fixture of these industrial spaces as the machinery itself. So when this particular engineer spots the small, grey corpse lying near the base of a coal-fired boiler, he does what any sensible man in his position would do. He picks it up with a shovel, tosses it into the fire, and thinks nothing more of it. Seconds later, the boiler explodes. The engineer survives, though the boiler does not. The investigation that follows is thorough, meticulous, and ultimately baffling. There is no obvious mechanical failure, no evidence of sabotage in any conventional sense, just a dead rat, and then an explosion. For a moment, perhaps, someone in the German command structure wonders whether they have gone slightly mad. Then the reports start coming in from other facilities. More dead rats, more explosions, more engineers staring at the wreckage of machinery that should, by all rights, still be working. By the time the Germans begin to understand what is happening to them, it is already too late to stop it. Britain has deployed one of the most quietly ingenious and deeply peculiar weapons in the history of modern warfare, and it is shaped very convincingly like a rat. This is the story of the exploding rat. A weapon so strange, so psychologically unsettling, that even after the war ended, many people simply refused to believe it had existed. And yet it had. The records are there, the surviving examples are there, and the damage it caused, both physical and psychological, was very real indeed. To understand why anyone thought to build such a thing, you have to understand the particular problem facing Britain's Special Operations Executive in the early years of the war. The Special Operations Executive, the SOE, was established in July 1940 by direct order of Winston Churchill, who famously instructed it to set Europe ablaze. In practice, this meant organizing resistance networks across occupied Europe, training agents in the dark arts of sabotage, and, crucially, supplying those agents with the tools they needed to cause maximum disruption to the German war machine, with minimum resources and minimum risk of detection. That last part was the real challenge. German-occupied Europe was not a place where you could walk into a factory carrying a suitcase full of explosives without attracting considerable attention. Security was tight. Informants were everywhere. The punishment for sabotage was swift and brutal. What the SOE needed were weapons that could be smuggled into position without raising suspicion. Devices so innocuous in their appearance that even a thorough search might miss them entirely. The SOE's research and development section, operating out of a collection of commandeered houses and workshops collectively known as Station 9 near Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire, threw itself at this problem with considerable creativity. Station 9 was a remarkable place, a kind of wartime Willy Wonka factory, staffed by engineers, chemists, and designers who spent their days dreaming up increasingly improbable ways to destroy things. They produced hollow logs that concealed timers, fake lumps of coal packed with explosive, briefcases with hidden compartments, walking sticks that were, in fact, guns, and eventually, inevitably, they produced the exploding rat. The concept was straightforward, even if the execution required a certain tolerance for unpleasantness. Real rats, genuine dead animals, were collected, carefully skinned, and then stuffed not with the usual taxidermist materials, but with plastic explosive. The skin was then sewn back up, and the resulting object was, to all outward appearances, simply a dead rat. The kind of dead rat you might find anywhere there was machinery, coal, or poor sanitation, which in wartime Germany was quite a lot of places. The specific explosive used was a British development called PE2, a plastic explosive with a consistency not unlike putty, which could be molded into almost any shape and was stable enough to handle without particular risk of accidental detonation. A single rat could be stuffed with roughly a pound, approximately 450 grams, of PE2. On its own, that quantity of explosive was not enough to destroy a large structure, but it was more than sufficient to rupture a boiler, destroy a critical piece of machinery, or start a fire in an enclosed space. The rats were designed not to be thrown directly into fires themselves. They were too obvious a target if placed carelessly, but rather to be mixed in with coal supplies, where they would be shoveled up by unsuspecting workers and fed into furnaces in the ordinary course of operations. The genius of the design was not merely in the deception, though that was formidable. It was in the timing. The rat did not need a detonator in the conventional sense. The furnace provided that. Once the animal was fed into the fire along with a shovelful of coal, the heat would cause the PE2 to detonate with considerable force. There would be no ticking clock to find, no wire to trace, no suspicious package to investigate. Just a rat, and then an explosion, and then a great deal of confusion. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. It keeps this kind of history alive for everyone who loves it. The production process was, by any measure, deeply unglamorous. The SOE required a steady supply of rats, specifically dead ones of the right size and in reasonable enough condition to be processed without falling apart. Records from Station 9 suggest that a network of suppliers, including pest control operators and university laboratories, provided the animals, though exactly how many were produced remains a matter of some uncertainty. Estimates from various historical sources suggest somewhere in the low hundreds, though the classification of many SOE records means that firm figures are difficult to establish. Each rat was a bespoke item, prepared by hand, and the process was time-consuming enough that mass production was never really feasible. The weapon was ready by early 1943. The plan was to supply them to resistance agents across occupied Europe, particularly in France, Belgium, and the occupied territories of Eastern Europe, who would then place them in coal supplies destined for German industrial facilities. The psychological element was central to the design. Even if every rat was found and neutralized before it caused any direct damage, the mere knowledge that such devices existed would force the Germans to inspect every single piece of coal that entered any facility anywhere in the occupied territories. The disruption to ordinary operations would be enormous. And here is one of the most remarkable things about the exploding rat. In terms of direct physical damage, its impact was almost certainly minimal. The first consignment destined for deployment was intercepted by the Germans before it could be distributed. Exactly how this happened is not entirely clear from surviving records, but the interception meant that the element of surprise was significantly compromised almost immediately. German security services circulated detailed instructions and, reportedly, examples of the rats themselves to facility managers across the occupied territories. Engineers were told to inspect coal supplies carefully. Workers were warned to report any unusual finds. What happened next was precisely what the SOE had perhaps hoped for all along. The Germans began inspecting their coal, every lump, every shovelful, every delivery at every facility in the occupied zone. The operational disruption this caused was, by some estimates, substantially greater than anything the physical explosions might have achieved. German military analysts later acknowledged that the rat program had forced the reallocation of considerable manpower to inspection duties that would otherwise have been unnecessary. Soldiers who might have been doing something useful were instead spending their days peering at coal supplies in factory basements, looking for dead rodents that, in most cases, were never actually there. This is the particular brilliance of the exploding rat, and it places it in a distinct tradition of British wartime ingenuity. The Americans, to their considerable credit, developed some spectacular weapons during the same period. The proximity fuse, the Norden bomb sight, the remarkable variety of equipment produced under the Manhattan Project. But American ingenuity tended toward the direct and the powerful. British ingenuity, born perhaps of necessity and a certain inherited gift for eccentricity, tended toward the indirect and the psychological. The exploding rat did not need to explode very often, or at all, to be effective. It simply needed to exist, and to be known to exist. The Germans produced no equivalent. The closest parallel in Axis sabotage operations was the use of ordinary-looking objects, pens, briefcases, food tins, fitted with explosive charges. But none of these achieved the same psychological impact as the rat program, precisely because they were not alive to the particular power of disgust and confusion. A suspicious briefcase is just a suspicious briefcase. A dead rat could be anywhere. Other Allied programs explored similar territory. The American OSS, the precursor to the CIA, developed a range of disguised explosives, including fake horse dung, which was designed to be placed on roads used by German convoys. When vehicles drove over what appeared to be ordinary road debris, the resulting explosion would destroy a tire or damage a fuel line. The concept was sound, but the horse dung device never achieved the same notoriety as its British counterpart, possibly because horse dung, unlike a dead rat, does not carry quite the same existential unease. The legacy of the exploding rat is perhaps best understood not in terms of bridges destroyed or boilers ruptured, but in terms of what it demonstrated about the nature of psychological warfare. The weapon was a direct embodiment of the SOE's founding insight, that fear and uncertainty could be as effective as any conventional weapon, and that a well-placed deception could multiply the effect of limited resources many times over. This understanding did not disappear with the end of the war. The principles that informed the rat program, the use of disguised devices, the deliberate creation of paranoia in an enemy's logistical operations, remained relevant throughout the Cold War and beyond. Modern improvised explosive devices, whatever their moral context, owe something conceptually to the innovations of Station 9. The idea that an ordinary object might be weaponized, that any piece of debris in any location might be dangerous, is a psychological legacy that has outlasted the specific technology that first explored it. Surviving examples of the exploding rat can be seen today in several collections, most notably at the Special Forces Club in London and in various private holdings. They are strange things to look at, convincing enough in their taxidermy to provoke a moment of uncertainty, even knowing exactly what they are. The craftsmanship is, in its way, rather impressive. So we return, as we must, to that German engineer in the winter of 1943, standing before a shattered boiler, holding a very ordinary shovel, trying to understand what has just happened to him. He is a competent man, presumably, a professional. He has spent his career understanding how machines work and why they fail. He has a framework for making sense of the world, and yet the world has just presented him with something his framework cannot contain. A dead rat that explodes, a piece of vermin that is also a weapon. An enemy so resourceful, so peculiar in its thinking, so apparently unencumbered by the usual constraints of sanity, that it has taken the time to carefully skin a rat, fill it with explosive, sew it back up, and send it across occupied Europe to sit in a coal pile and wait. What must he have thought? Not just about the explosion, but about the people who built the thing, about what else they might have built, about what else in this factory, in this facility, in this ordinary and apparently unremarkable Tuesday might be waiting to surprise him. That uncertainty, that creeping, corrosive, utterly rational paranoia was the real weapon. The rat was just its delivery mechanism. Britain, in the darkest years of the war, looked at a dead rat and saw a possibility. That is, perhaps, the most remarkable thing of all.